In the vast expanse of the galaxy, the Elorians were once a beacon of hope and wisdom, their psychic abilities unmatched by any other species. They were more than just a race. They were the guardians of knowledge, the keepers of balance, capable of reading minds, predicting events, and even influencing the very fabric of reality. Their presence was revered and feared, a double-edged sword that both protected and isolated them. Across the galaxy, they were known as the unseen orchestrators of fate, their powers so profound that even the most advanced civilizations dared not cross them. Yet such immense power came at a cost. The Elorians, with their small population and inability to reproduce easily, were always at risk. Over time, the galaxy's complexities and the constant burden of their role began to take its toll. The once thriving Elorian race started to dwindle, their numbers fading like the dying embers of a fire that had once burned bright. Their wisdom, though immense, could not stave off the inevitable decline. Now only whispers remained of their former glory, as the galaxy moved on, leaving the Elorians on the brink of extinction. Amidst this decline, there was still a flicker of hope, a single child named Elara, the last of her kind. Young, innocent, and yet possessing the immense psychic potential of her ancestors, she was the final heir to the Elorian legacy. Her existence was a secret closely guarded, known to only a few, but in a galaxy full of treachery and greed, secrets like these never remained hidden for long. The Syndicate of Shadows, a ruthless crime organization feared across the galaxy, learned of Elara's existence. To them, she was not just a child, she was a weapon, a tool that could be sold to the highest bidder, a pawn in their endless game of power and domination. The Syndicate, with its vast network of spies and enforcers, set its sights on capturing her. No one could stop them, no one dared to. Elara's capture was swift and brutal. They descended upon the hidden world where she was kept safe, their methods precise and merciless. The guardians assigned to protect her were no match for the Syndicate's elite forces. Elara, terrified and alone, was taken from the only home she had ever known. Her captors were cold and unfeeling, their eyes devoid of compassion as they dragged her away, her small frame dwarfed by the cold, mechanical hands of her abductors. She could feel their malevolence, their hunger for the power she represented. But she was just a child, and the weight of her destiny was far too heavy for her young shoulders. The Syndicate wasted no time in preparing her for auction. They knew the value of what they had, and they were eager to exploit it. Across the galaxy, whispers spread of a rare and powerful asset coming to market, and those in power began to salivate at the thought of controlling the last Elorian. The bidding would be fierce, and the price unimaginable. But for the Syndicate, it wasn't just about the credits, it was about the control, the influence, and the fear they could instill in others by holding the last of the Elorians in their grasp. Meanwhile, the galaxy watched in silence. The Galactic Council, once the moral compass of interstellar politics, now stood paralyzed by fear. The Syndicate's power was too great, their reach too far. The council members whispered among themselves, debating the ethics of intervention, but in the end, their fear won out. To oppose the Syndicate was to invite chaos, and so they did nothing, allowing the crime lords to proceed with their vile plans. The other civilizations, too, turned a blind eye. They had their own problems, their own conflicts, and the fate of a single alien child was not worth risking the wrath of the Syndicate. It was easier to ignore, easier to pretend that this was not their concern. And so, Elara's fate was sealed, or so it seemed. The Syndicate thrived on this apathy, on the fear they instilled in others. Their power was absolute, their influence unmatched. They were the shadow that loomed over the galaxy, and no one dared to stand against them. Elara was just another piece in their game, another tool to be used and discarded. And with the galaxy looking the other way, there was no one left to protect her. No one, except a single human who had yet to step into the light. Marcus Thorne was once a name spoken with respect and fear across the battlefields of distant worlds. A decorated space marine, he had seen more than his share of war, had led men and women into the heart of darkness and brought them back, most of the time. But war leaves scars, not just on the body, but on the soul. For Marcus, the deepest wound was not one he suffered in battle, but the loss of his daughter, taken from him by a senseless accident that no amount of military training could have prevented. Her death left a void in his heart, a chasm of grief that time had only deepened. The galaxy, with all its chaos and conflict, became a place of ghosts and regrets, each day a reminder of what he had lost. In the years that followed, Marcus drifted through life like a ship without a course. The once fierce warrior now sought solace in isolation, far from the battles that had once defined him. He wandered the outer reaches of the galaxy, searching for a peace that eluded him, a redemption that seemed out of reach. His skills, once razor-sharp, had dulled with disuse, and his body, though still strong, bore the aches and pains of age. Yet, in the quiet of his solitude, the memories of his daughter remained as vivid as ever, a constant reminder of the man he had been, and the man he had lost. It was during one of his aimless travels, in a rundown spaceport on a forgotten world, that Marcus first heard of Alara. The conversation was one of many, a background noise in a place where secrets and deals were exchanged like currency. But something about the mention of a child, a powerful and vulnerable child, caught his attention. As the details of the syndicate's plan reached his ears, the calm that Marcus had tried so hard to cultivate shattered. The thought of a child being used as a pawn, exploited for her abilities, struck a chord deep within him, one that resonated with the pain of his own loss. Anger flared, hot and raw, but beneath it was something more profound, a sorrow that he had long tried to bury, and a need for justice that refused to be silenced. Marcus knew the syndicate, knew their reputation for cruelty and power. To go against them was to invite death, and yet the idea of doing nothing, of allowing another child to suffer, was something he couldn't accept. The internal struggle was fierce, a battle between self-preservation and the deeply ingrained sense of duty that had once driven him to fight for those who couldn't defend themselves. Memories of his daughter flooded his mind, her laughter, her bright eyes, the way she had looked to him for protection. He had failed to save her, but this time, maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. The decision wasn't easy, but it was inevitable. Marcus knew what he had to do, even if it meant facing the demons of his past, even if it meant risking everything he had left. The thought of Alara in the hands of the syndicate was more than he could bear. She was innocent, and in that innocence, Marcus saw the reflection of his daughter, a chance to do what he had been unable to do before, save a life, protect a child. Determined, Marcus began to prepare. His equipment was old, his ship a relic from another time, but his resolve was unshaken. He checked and rechecked his weapons, recalling the drills and routines that had once been second nature. His body, though aged, still responded to the call of duty, muscle memory guiding his actions as he geared up for the mission ahead. Every movement was a step back into a life he had left behind, a return to the warrior he once was, but this time, it wasn't for glory or for the orders of a distant command, it was for a child, a chance at redemption. As he made his final preparations, Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he had made. This wasn't just another mission, it was a turning point, a moment where the path of his life would either lead to salvation or destruction. The significance of what he was about to do was not lost on him. He was about to challenge one of the most feared organizations in the galaxy, not for fame, not for money, but for the chance to save an innocent life, to protect the vulnerable, to stand against the darkness that had taken so much from him. With everything in place, Marcus took one last look at the worn photograph of his daughter that he kept with him, a reminder of the love he had lost and the love that still drove him. Then, with a deep breath, he boarded his ship, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The mission wasn't just about Alara. It was about Marcus finding a way to heal, to honor the memory of his daughter by saving another child from a fate she didn't deserve. In that moment, Marcus Thorne was no longer a retired soldier, no longer a man haunted by his past. He was a protector, a force to be reckoned with, and he was ready to act. The syndicate's auction took place on a space station that loomed like a dark, malevolent shadow against the backdrop of distant stars. This was no ordinary station. It was a fortress, bristling with defenses and shrouded in secrecy. The syndicate had spared no expense in making it impenetrable, a stronghold where only the most powerful and corrupt dared to tread. The station's exterior was a labyrinth of armored plating and weaponry, designed to repel any unwelcome visitors, while the interior was a twisted maze of corridors, each more treacherous than the last. Every corner was watched, every entrance guarded by the Syndicate's best. Marcus knew that brute force would be futile here. The Syndicate's security was legendary, and any direct assault would end in disaster. Instead, he relied on the skills that had served him so well in the past: stealth, precision, and patience. Slipping into the station unnoticed was a challenge, but Marcus had planned meticulously, exploiting the few weaknesses he could identify in the Syndicate's defenses. He moved like a shadow through the darkened corridors, evading detection by the numerous sensors and patrols that filled the station. The tension was palpable as Marcus made his way deeper into the heart of the station. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. He knew that one mistake would be his last. The air was thick with danger, the sense that he was walking a tightrope over a chasm, with death waiting on either side. Yet, despite the fear that gnawed at him, Marcus pressed on, driven by the memory of his daughter and the promise he had made to himself to save Elara. The auction room was a stark contrast to the rest of the station, a place of opulence and power, where the galaxy's most corrupt gathered to bid on lives as if they were commodities. It was here that the Syndicate's most dangerous enforcers stood guard, each one a deadly opponent, trained to kill without hesitation. These were not mere thugs. They were the elite, the Syndicate's personal guard, hand-picked for their ruthlessness and skill. Their presence was a clear message: this was the Syndicate's domain, and any challenge to their authority would be met with swift and brutal retribution. As Marcus moved closer to his target, the tension snapped into action. He was spotted, and the enforcers sprang into motion, their weapons drawn, ready to eliminate the intruder. The ensuing confrontation was fierce, a deadly dance of life and death. Marcus, outnumbered and outgunned, relied on his combat experience, his every move a testament to the years he had spent honing his skills. The enforcers were fast, precise, and merciless, but Marcus was faster, more precise, his mind and body working in perfect unison. He moved through them like a force of nature, his old instincts taking over as he ducked, weaved, and struck with lethal efficiency. The enforcers were relentless, their attacks coordinated and brutal, but Marcus was relentless too, his determination a shield against the overwhelming odds. He used the environment to his advantage, turning the station's corridors and alcoves into traps for his pursuers, whittling down their numbers one by one. But the battle took its toll. Marcus could feel the strain in his muscles, the fatigue that threatened to slow him down, but he couldn't afford to stop. The enforcers were closing in, their superior numbers and advanced weaponry making the fight increasingly desperate. Yet Marcus pushed on, his thoughts focused on one thing: Elara. Every moment counted, every second brought him closer to her, and closer to the mission he had staked everything on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of fighting, Marcus reached the chamber where Elara was held. The room was cold, sterile, a high-tech prison designed to contain the immense power of the last Elorian. Elara was trapped within a shimmering containment field, her small figure dwarfed by the machines that surrounded her. She looked terrified, her eyes wide with fear as she gazed at the man who had fought his way to her. Marcus approached cautiously, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had seen and done. He saw in her the same innocence, the same vulnerability that had haunted him for years. But there was no time for hesitation. He needed to get her out, to save her from the fate the Syndicate had planned. His voice, though firm, was gentle as he spoke to her, trying to calm her fears, to let her know that she was safe now, that he would protect her. Elara's fear began to melt away as she sensed the sincerity in his words. She could feel the pain that radiated from him, the echoes of a loss that mirrored her own, and in that moment, an unspoken bond formed between them. Marcus wasn't just another soldier, another protector. He was someone who understood, someone who had suffered and survived, just as she had. In his presence, Elara felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of something she thought had been lost forever. With newfound determination, Marcus deactivated the containment field, carefully lifting Elara into his arms. As they prepared to make their escape, Marcus knew that the hardest part was still ahead. But he also knew that he wouldn't fail her, not like he had failed before. Elara was more than just a mission now, she was a chance for redemption, a reason to keep fighting, and Marcus was ready to do whatever it took to ensure her safety, no matter the cost. As Marcus and Elara made their escape from the auction, the station erupted into chaos. The Syndicate, furious at the disruption of their plans, unleashed their forces in a relentless pursuit. Every corridor they fled through echoed with the sounds of approaching danger. The chase was intense, with the odds stacked heavily against them. The Syndicate's ships were fast, their pilots ruthless, and they closed in quickly as Marcus guided his battered vessel through the void of space. The stakes had never been higher. Every twist, every turn brought them closer to capture, or worse. The tension was palpable as Marcus navigated the narrow paths between asteroids and space debris, using every bit of his experience to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. The ship creaked under the strain, alarms blaring as it took hit after hit. But amid the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Marcus, who had been focused solely on survival, began to sense a shift in the air, a connection forming between him and Elara. It wasn't just the desperation of their situation, it was something deeper, more profound. As the chase continued, they found themselves working in unison, their actions synchronized, their trust in each other solidifying with every passing second. It was during a particularly harrowing moment, when the Syndicate had nearly cornered them, that Elara's fear overwhelmed her. She felt the cold grip of terror, the hopelessness of their situation pressing down on her small frame. But instead of succumbing to it, something inside her broke free. In an instant, her latent psychic abilities surged to the surface, triggered by the intensity of her emotions. A wave of raw energy rippled through the ship, catching Marcus off guard as it swept through him. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just aware of his own thoughts and feelings, he was acutely in tune with Elara's as well. Her grief, her anger, and her desperate hope all poured into him, amplifying his own emotions until they were nearly unbearable. But with this torrent of emotion came a surge of power, a transformation that Marcus had never anticipated. His senses sharpened, his reactions quickened, and a strength he hadn't felt in years flooded his veins. It was as if Elara's powers had awakened something dormant within him, something primal and fierce. In that moment, Marcus became a force to be reckoned with. His movements, once measured and calculated, now carried an almost supernatural precision. The Syndicate's ships, which had been closing in, suddenly seemed slower, their pilots less skilled as Marcus maneuvered through their ranks with a lethal efficiency. He could feel the energy coursing through him, guided by Elara's emotions, and it made him nearly unstoppable. Yet, as exhilarating as this newfound power was, it was also terrifying. Marcus could sense the edges of his control fraying, the overwhelming intensity threatening to consume him. Elara, too, felt the strain. She hadn't meant to unleash such power, and the fear that she might have harmed Marcus with her abilities gnawed at her. She watched as he fought with a ferocity that bordered on the inhuman, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had done the right thing. The bond they shared had become a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave them the strength to fight back, but on the other, it threatened to destroy the man who had risked everything to save her. As the battle raged on, Marcus fought to maintain control over the emotions and power swirling within him. Every action, every thought was a struggle between embracing the strength Elara's powers had given him and keeping hold of his humanity. He could feel the anger and grief pulling him toward a path of destruction, a path that could easily lead to his undoing if he wasn't careful. It was a delicate balance, one that required all of his willpower to maintain. But despite the overwhelming pressure, Marcus knew he couldn't afford to falter. Elara was counting on him, and the connection they shared, while dangerous, was also the key to their survival. He could feel her fear, her worry for him, and it helped to ground him, to remind him of the man he wanted to be, not the weapon he could become. Together they managed to fight off their pursuers, their combined strength just enough to keep them from being overwhelmed. As the last of the Syndicate's ships fell behind, Marcus finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. The adrenaline still coursed through him, but the immediate danger had passed. He could feel the raw power subsiding, the intense emotions beginning to settle, but the experience had left its mark. Both Marcus and Elara knew that they had crossed a line, one that couldn't easily be uncrossed. The bond they now shared was powerful, but it was also fragile, and they would need to be careful not to let it consume them. Elara's powers, while a gift, were also a responsibility, one that neither she nor Marcus fully understood yet. And as they continued their journey, they both realized that the battle they had just fought was only the beginning. There were still enemies out there, forces that would stop at nothing to claim Elara and the power she wielded. But with Marcus by her side, and the bond they had forged, they had a fighting chance, a chance to survive, to protect each other, and to find a way forward in a galaxy that had given them little reason to hope. As Marcus and Elara approached the heart of the Syndicate's stronghold, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. They uncovered the identity of the Syndicate's true leader, a figure who had remained in the shadows, pulling strings from behind the scenes. It was a revelation that shocked Marcus to his core. The leader was none other than a former member of the Galactic Council, a man who had once been a beacon of justice and integrity. But power had corrupted him, and his fall from grace had been steep. He had turned against the very ideals he once stood for, using his influence and knowledge to create the Syndicate and control the galaxy from the shadows. This leader had orchestrated everything, from the capture of Elara to the manipulation of the galactic powers that allowed the Syndicate to operate unchecked. His goal was far more sinister than mere wealth or power. He sought to harness Elara's psychic abilities, not just to control the galaxy, but to reshape it entirely. Through ancient texts and forgotten histories, he had discovered the truth about the Elorians, a truth that had been lost to time. The Elorians had once shared a deep connection with early humans, guiding and influencing the rise of human civilizations. This bond, forged millennia ago, had been severed by time and conflict, but the potential for it remained, buried deep within the genetic memory of both species. The leader's plan was to exploit this connection, using Elara's powers to unlock the latent abilities within humanity, creating a new order where he would reign supreme. He saw himself as a god, a ruler over both the Elorians and humans, and he would stop at nothing to achieve this vision. For Marcus and Elara, this revelation was both horrifying and galvanizing. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined, and they knew that the final confrontation would determine the fate of not just themselves, but the entire galaxy. The confrontation was brutal, a clash of wills and powers in a battle that shook the very foundations of the Syndicate's stronghold. Marcus fought with a fury he hadn't known he possessed, driven by the bond he shared with Elara and the knowledge of what was at stake. The leader, wielding the full might of the Syndicate's forces and his own twisted understanding of the ancient connection, seemed almost invincible. But in the heat of battle, Elara made a decision that would change everything. Realizing that the leader's power could only be countered by something equally strong, she chose to merge her consciousness with Marcus. This was no simple act. It was a sacrifice of the highest order. By merging with Marcus, Elara would amplify his abilities beyond anything they had experienced before, but it would also mean the end of her physical form. She would become a part of him, a living memory, her powers fully integrated into his being. The moment of merging was profound, a flood of emotions and memories that surged through Marcus like a tidal wave. He felt Elara's presence within him, her strength, her fears, her hope for a future where she and her people could have lived in peace. The bond they shared became something far deeper, something eternal. With this newfound power, Marcus was able to turn the tide of battle, his abilities now far surpassing those of the leader. The Syndicate's forces fell before him, their weapons and technology no match for the combined strength of Marcus and Elara. But the victory came at a cost. As the leader lay defeated, the stronghold crumbling around them, Marcus felt the weight of what had been lost. Elara's sacrifice had saved them, but it had also taken her from him. She was no longer a separate entity, no longer the child he had sworn to protect. She was a part of him now, and though he could feel her presence, it wasn't the same. The connection they had forged was unbreakable, but it was also bittersweet, a reminder of the price they had paid for victory. In the aftermath, the syndicate was shattered, its power broken, and its leader exposed for the traitor he was. The galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief as the threat was finally extinguished. But for Marcus, the end of the syndicate marked the beginning of a new chapter. He emerged from the ruins of the stronghold not as the man he once was, but as something more, a living testament to the bond between humans and Elorians, a guardian of a legacy that had nearly been lost. Marcus became known across the galaxy as the Guardian of the Elorian, a figure of legend and inspiration. His story spread far and wide, a tale of sacrifice, redemption, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The connection between humans and Elorians, once thought lost, was now preserved within him, a beacon of hope for a future where both species could thrive together.